in introducing what I believe to be landmark legislation, the Carbon Limits and Energy for America's Renewal, or CLEAR Act. Let me commend the Senator for her leadership on this important issue. Madam President, one of the most appealing parts of this bill is it takes a fresh look at the issues that are facing our country in the area of developing alternative energy, promoting energy independence, and addressing climate change and the need for more green jobs in our economy. Indeed, this bill addresses the most significant energy and environmental challenges that we face. It would help to reduce our dependence on foreign oil, promote alternative energy and energy conservation, and advance the goal of energy independence for our nation. The costs of gas and oil impose a great burden on many Americans, particularly those living in large rural states like the state of Maine. High gasoline prices have a disproportionate impact on Mainers who often have no choice but to travel long distances to their jobs, the grocery stores, doctors' offices. This lessens the amount of money that they have to spend on other necessities. In addition, Madam President, 80% of Mainers heat their homes with home heating oil. That is one of the highest percentages in the nation. So the state of Maine is one of the states most dependent on foreign oil of any state in the nation. Our nation must work together on comprehensive long-term actions that will stabilize gas and oil prices, help to prevent energy shortages, avoid those spikes when we're held hostage to foreign oil, and achieve national energy independence. This effort will require a stronger commitment to renewable energy sources such as wind energy, as well as energy efficiency and conservation. The development and implementation of these new approaches to environmental stewardship and energy independence will also provide a powerful stimulus to our economy and the creation of green jobs. And Madam President, like my colleague, I want the United States to lead the way on green technology, not lose our edge to China, for example. In addition to advancing these goals, the CLEAR Act is the fairest climate change approach from the perspective of consumers because it would rebate 75% of the proceeds generated by the cap on carbon emissions directly to citizens. I think that is a tremendous advantage of this bill over alternative approaches such as the cap and trade bill. I also share the concerns of my colleague from Washington State about the abuses that we have seen in energy and agricultural markets when speculators are allowed to participate in the market. That's why in our bill, which imposes an upstream cap on carbon, only the producers are allowed to participate in the trading. I think that is a far better approach that will guard against market manipulation and excessive speculation. Madam President, in the United States alone, emissions of the primary greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide, have risen more than 20% since 1990. Clearly, climate change is a daunting environmental challenge, but we must develop solutions that do not impose a heavy burden on our economy, particularly during these difficult economic times. And that's why I'm pleased to join as the lead co-sponsor of the CLEAR Act. Climate change legislation must protect consumers and industries that could be hit with higher energy prices. We must recognize that many of our citizens are struggling to afford their monthly energy bills now and cannot afford dramatically higher prices. We also must produce legislation that would provide predictability in the price of carbon emissions so that businesses can plan, invest, and create good jobs. Climate change legislation should encourage the adoption of energy efficiency measures and the further development of renewable energy. Madam President, I'm very excited about the possibilities for the state of Maine because of its immense potential to develop offshore wind energy. Estimates are that the development of 5 gigawatts of offshore wind in Maine would be enough to power more than 1 million homes for a year. It could attract $20 billion of investment to the state of Maine and create more than 15,000 green energy jobs, jobs that are desperately needed in our state. The CLEAR Act would help to achieve all of those goals. Madam President, I could not support the bill that was passed to deal with climate change by the House of Representatives. Let me just read a couple of the descriptions of that bill. The New York Times described it as, quote, fat with compromises, carve-outs, concessions, and out-and-out gifts. The Washington Post, in an editorial, described it as having pollution credits and revenue that were divvied up to the advantage of politically favored polluters. I do not believe this bill, which is a 2,000-page monstrosity, can garner the necessary 60 votes to proceed in the Senate. The CLEAR Act, by contrast, would help to move a stalled debate forward by offering a fairer, a more efficient, and a straightforward approach. Madam President, you've only to look at our bill. It is 39 pages long compared to 2,000 pages of the House-passed bill. Madam President, my full statement goes into detail on how the bill would work. And I hope that my colleagues will look closely at it. But let me just talk about one part, and that is in the CLEAR Act, 75% of the carbon auction revenues would be returned to consumers as tax-free rebates. They wouldn't be lost to speculation or to a $500 million of fees every year to investment firms on Wall Street. No, 75% of those revenues would be returned on a per capita basis to consumers. And that means that 80% of Americans would incur no net new costs under the CLEAR Act. The average Mainer would stand to actually gain $102 per year from the CLEAR Act. And I can tell you, Mainers would welcome that. It would help them winterize their homes, meet their energy bills, invest in energy conservation and efficiency, or just have a little more money to get by. By contrast, under the House-passed cap-and-trade bill, the average citizen in this country would experience a net cost increase of $175 per year. Boy, that is a big difference and a big advantage of the Cantwell-Collins approach. Now, what about the other 25% of the auction revenues? What we would propose is that those would go to a trust fund to fund energy efficiency programs and renewable energy research and development, to provide incentives for forestry and agricultural practices that sequester carbon, to encourage practices that reduce other greenhouse gases, to help energy-efficient, energy-intensive manufacturers, and to assist low-income consumers. That fund would be called the Clean Energy Reinvestment Trust, the CERT Fund, and it would be subject to the annual appropriations process so that Congress could adapt assistance for climate-related activities on an annual basis rather than being locked into a complicated allocation scheme that may well favor special interests. Madam President, I am excited about this bill. It offers us a way forward to a green economy. It will help create jobs. It will alleviate the burden on consumers, and particularly in New England, where the presiding officer and I live, as well as the Northwest. It makes sense. It is a common sense approach, and I hope my colleagues will consider joining the senator from Washington and me on this important legislation. And again, I want to commend Senator Cantwell's leadership. She has done a great deal of work to come up with this approach, and I'm excited to be joining her in this effort. Thank you, Madam President.